Okay, and it's time for a scheduled webinar, so I appreciate everybody making time today. Hope you guys find this to be an enjoyable and informational session. We're here to talk about SIEM migrations, and there's a lot of challenges that can come with SIEM migration, so we're going to try to give you guys some advice on things that you can do to make the process simpler. And I'm pleased to be joined by a couple of experts in the field. So today, again, streamlining SIEM migrations and optimizing your SOC with SnapAttack and Google Chronicle. I'm Paul Caiazzo. I'll be our moderator today. Quick background on me. I have about 20-ish years of experience in cybersecurity, much of that focused on security operations, SIEM management, threat detection, incident response, and things along those lines. So this is a subject that's pretty near and dear to my heart, and I'm pleased to be joined by Ryan Rubian and by Fred Fry. Guys, you want to quickly introduce yourselves as well?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me. My name is Ryan Rubian. I am a global principal architect within Google Cloud Security, so representing all Google Cloud Security products and solutions as a a subject matter expert, helping out our customers, helping out our sales organization, product organization in various capacities. So really looking forward to this session today, and thanks again for having me.
Yeah, my name is Fred Fry. I'm the current CTO of SnapAttack. 25 years of cybersecurity experience. First started off in the offensive world, so first 16 years, more offensive in nature, red teaming, pen testing, reversing malware. Switched over to do threat hunting, detection engineering. Around 2008, started following advanced persistent threats. So very much on the detection engineering, side of things. And I'm very excited about this. I've helped many companies transition in a previous consulting role from SIEMs to SIEMs, EDRs to different EDRs. And so here to share some pain points. So hopefully you guys don't relive some of those pain points. So
that's great.
Thanks for having
me. Guys. Yes, I think it's going to be a great discussion. So like I said, there's a lot of potential challenges that you can find within the process of migrating SIEMs, and them being such critical components of security operations architectures, it's really important to get it right. And so again, hopefully throughout the course of this, you guys will take some nuggets away that you can implement in your own environment. But first, I wanted to start with just, why do we think people are migrating SIEMs in the first place? There's, I think, a variety of reasons that could be both technical or business, but I'd love to get some perspectives from you guys. Have you, in your conversations with customers, been encountering any, sort of common themes that are running through what's motivating people to even contemplate taking on this significant challenge of migrating a SIEM environment? Why don't we start with you, Ben?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's certainly been a lot of evolution just in the IT world over the last several years and decade and more. And, organizations that have implemented SIEMs, many years ago or in the early days of when SIEMs first came to market, they're facing some challenges in several areas around, cost, scalability, performance. Possibly the solution that they have in place is unable to keep up with the innovations that are being seen in the marketplace and in this market overall in the SIEM or security operations space. So those challenges are really causing organizations to relook at how they can transform their SOC or transform their overall security operations capabilities, and what solutions are out there that can ultimately allow them to scale more effectively, allow them to get better performance, allow them to have access to tool sets and automation and workflows and just overall technical capability that can really help them advance and better protect their organization and get insights into the threats that may be within their organization. So all those things really come into play and really are what's top of mind for a lot of organizations when they're looking at alternatives in the market.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I heard technical capability, scale, speed, things like that, and you kind of touched on threats towards the end there. Do you think the evolution of threat landscape is really driving any of this, or is it more about like what product capabilities are available to consumers?
Yeah, I mean, it's all of it, but certainly on the threat angle, I think it's certainly been publicized a lot and talked about a lot for years now. Just alert fatigue, and a lot of legacy SIEMs are focused on managing alerts and responding to alerts. And newer platforms and newer approaches are really focused on managing threats, and not just alerts that are being triggered through various technologies. So how do we get smarter about responding to the threats that are inside of your environment? How do we get better insights into those? How do we have more automation in our ability to investigate and respond those threats? Those are something that older platforms or vendors in this space have been frankly unable to keep up with, and certainly at scale, unable to really do that at scale. So those are some key factors. Certainly there are a lot of financial considerations as well. I mentioned scale a couple of times, and just overall infrastructure considerations. When you think about some of these legacy SIEM platforms that may be deployed on on-prem customer hosted hardware, or even virtual infrastructure, regardless of what it is, that could be very outdated. That could require significant financial and technical investment in terms of refreshing that. You could be hitting some significant limitations on that front. So, looking at things and teasing a little bit of where we'll get to later on is, looking at cloud native solutions that have much more scalability potential, with much less cost and much less complexity inherent into them.
And a lot less administrative burden for managing those sorts of technologies.
100%.
Fred, I'm curious your thoughts on that. Ryan mentioned false positives and sort of alerts for the sake of alerts versus actually identification of threats. Does that resonate with you, or do you have anything else to add as it relates to what's motivating SIEM migrations?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you really think about the history, I mean, the SIEM is the central nervous system for all SOCs, right? So in the old days, it was, born out of the need to consolidate all of alerts into one solid pane of glass, right? Or glass of pain, as some people say. But yes, it was centralization of those alerts that drove us here. And then in the 2000s, we started seeing data, right? So data coming into play. So then data lakes and SIEMs kind of were almost synonymous, right? So, data lakes and SIEM, but we were still on premise. As we go forward, we have so much more data. And to your point, the more data you have, the better you can rate detections for, right? And so what we're seeing now is not just single point of alerts from one vendor, but the consolidation of, proxy firewalls combined with EDR technologies. So now you don't need this single vendor sending you alerts. You need this data lake with a process management ticketing system, automation built onto it. And then the data is just getting so much exponentially larger that, in the early 2000s, we were all on premise. So it makes a lot of sense to transition to cloud as we're doing that. It makes sense to consolidate where your data is with your detection engineering processes. False positive reduction, really big. We're going to hit on this a lot when we talk about pain points, but automating that. How do we automate false positive reduction and things like that? So yeah, I mean, absolutely. As we think about, I really bucket it into 2000 to 2010 SIEMs, 2010 to 2020, and then 2020 on. Are you setting up for AI in the future? Do you have the data, and the scalability of technology to adapt to the future?
Yeah, I love the timeline kind of breakdown of that. I think that's spot on. And one last point from me is, and you touched on it around EDR and just the overall increase in data, right? So that's really forcing the acceleration of how much storage or infrastructure you would need if you're an on-prem customer. And a lot of on-prem SIEM deployments are, those customers are left with an inability to ingest critical, data from, say, EDR platforms or let's say cloud platforms. If you're starting to move into the cloud, it's very inefficient and costly to start routing that logging and event data back into your own network. What's the point? The whole point of cloud is to get away from that. So all of those things are really forcing the hand of the customer to say, all right, we need to reevaluate this and think differently.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And one thing I've frequently seen is sort of this cost versus security trade-off that CISOs have to make, to the point of what data should we collect? Because obviously most legacy SIEMs are priced or licensed based upon how much data they're consuming But we as security people would say consume all the data, because to your point, Fred, the more data you have, the better detections you can write. But you frequently can't make that decision or can't make that choice because you're forced down a licensing route that you simply can't afford if you want to be able to do all that stuff, which in and of itself creates some challenges in terms of how do we architect the new SIEM. But I know that that's a process or fraught with myriad challenges. I'm curious if you guys can call out any specific challenges that you've seen people struggle with as it relates to the actual process of SIEM migration. So Fred, why don't we start with you on that?
Yeah, I think you just named it. It's there's really, I think there's going to be a theme of this conversation around the SIEM is this confluence of really three major aspects. There's the technological aspects of, can you do it? Can you store the data? Can your teams, do that? There's the business aspect, right? Is this cost effective for me to maintain this, or is it total cost of ownership better in the cloud or in some sort of a more modern SIEM? And then the third one is the automation piece, right? So we're talking about not only AI and automation, but also automated false positive reduction. You're almost getting into SOAR type technologies and how that interplays. So as far as pain points, you could really think about those pain points in those three. So I'll touch on the technological aspects of it. Some of the technology aspects are, what data am I collecting, and is it sufficient to detect adversaries? And so a lot of people come to us and they ask, at SnapAttack, they ask us, am I collecting the right data? And the right way to think about it is from an adversarial approach. So first, what are the adversaries doing? What are the threats that you're trying to protect? Those threats are going to be leaving behind forensic evidence on these systems. What are they? Are they network? Are they, like network or proxy, DNS, URL browsing, things like that? Are they endpoint stuff? So are they Windows event logs, syslog-d? What fingerprints are the adversaries leaving? Then within that, because this is still a big bucket, what are the most critical ones? And so if you really think about it from a threat, hackers are going to hack. They're going to leave forensic evidence. Evidence is logs. Logs are being, pulled up. Some of them have to, for financial reasons, have to be left at the endpoint. But elevating up the right logs to your SIEM so that your detection engineers are empowered to write the right detections. That's the right way to think about it. So it's not, don't think about your detections and then back into, do I have the right logs? You should sort of think it from a threat perspective. What are the threats? What forensic evidence? And then rate your detections to that and elevate those detections. Some other challenges that we've seen with SIEM migrations is, quite frankly, the language barrier, right? So you literally are learning a second language when you change SIEM vendors, and that can be really challenging. Overall, it might be the right way because there's a lot of technological advancements with some of the new query languages. There's some really, really powerful stuff that didn't exist 5 years ago. But retraining and retooling your staff, your processes, and your SOAR technology to a whole new language can be challenging. So really what you got to think about is the threat. It all comes down to what the threat is. And if you can abstract away your goals from as a business perspective of, I need to mitigate this threat. Obviously, mitigations first should be patches. Patches aren't sufficient enough. So then you need to collect forensic evidence in data lakes, then write detections, elevate detections up to your log status, up to your alert status, so that humans can action it, or hopefully SOARs can automate it. So I think that's really one of the major things is, are you collecting the right data? Think threat first, and then worry about detection engineering. Don't have the tail wag the dog in that scenario.
That's what I was actually where I was going to go, because I think most people do come from the perspective of, I had X detection in my old platform. I need, a concordant detection that would match that in the new platform. But I think what you're saying is you might not necessarily need to look at it from that perspective. You simply need to ensure that you can detect the threats that might be relevant to you, or the threats that matter to your organization, which in and of itself, I'm sure, has a wide array of challenges. Brian, you have any thoughts on that, or any other challenges that you can think of from a SIEM migration standpoint?
Yeah, for sure. I love the points that Fred made, and it's important, thinking about that, to consider not just like a one-for-one swap. We're not just replacing this technology with this technology and we're going to do everything the same, and we're going to log or bring on the same exact log sources and just check the box that we've done the migration. There's so much more than that, and it's rethinking a new way to really deliver security operations, services to the organization, and think of a new, better approach to, handling incidents and handling threats, as Fred was alluding to. Also, for a lot of organizations, this is the first time they're going to go through such an effort. So not all customers get it right. They don't always engage the right vendors or the right partners that have the level of expertise needed to really help them through that journey. If you've never been through it before, there's a lot of things to consider. It's a massive project, no matter how you look at it. So making sure that you have the right project plan and the right approach is critically important. So that's a big consideration as well. And that's something that we see, customers have some challenges around. So those are just some general considerations more from the technical side and the migration.
I think that's a really good point, because a SIEM, and maybe it's not unique with respect to security tools, but there's a really significant IT job that's associated with just keeping a SIEM healthy and up. But there's the added challenge of doing the security job on top of that IT infrastructure. And to your point earlier, Fred, it's really the lifeblood of the SOC in terms of making sure that the SIEM's doing its job, not purely from like an uptime perspective or even just a login just perspective, but are the right alerts being generated? Can we prove that the right alerts are being generated? Are the analysts that are actually triaging alerts able to do the right things and make the right decisions? Is the automation, sufficient to drive the velocity that we need? All those sorts of things. And I definitely have seen people get caught out with that, because, and to your point, Ryan, it may be the first time they've done it, and I would imagine they're hoping it's the last time that they do it, because this is not a project that you want to go through multiple frequent times. And Fred, I think you and I were on the same call where an organization told us that they had gone through 3 different SIEMs in the last 3 or 4 years, which blew my mind, because that's just such a massive investment of time just in trying to get through that. But bringing that down to sort of the output of the SIEM is really the SOC being a functional working unit. SOCs typically are super noisy. They can be very chaotic. I read a stat recently that said the average SOC deals with a 45 to 50% false positive rate. In my experience, I've seen way higher than that in a lot of organizations, and I would say 45 to 50% is probably reasonably tuned. But that really should have us scratching our heads like, is there a way that we could be thinking differently or better about optimizing security operation performance? Because if 50% of the time spent in the SOC dealing with the output of the SIEM is noise and a human has to triage it, it seems like there's got to be an opportunity for improvement there. So wondering if you guys have any advice as it relates to optimizing detection outcomes in SOCs, reducing false positive rates. And Fred, you had touched on false positive rates earlier, so why don't we start with you on this one?
Yeah, I think this is something that I'm pretty passionate about. It's it's such a problem. If you have it really talks and speaks to the disjointedness of organizations, right? So that there's detection engineers, there are SOC analysts, and they need to stay in tune, right? It makes no sense for detection engineers to create huge heaping detections if the SOC can never triage that, right? So you have to think about it from that perspective. And there are a bunch of different technologies that can help with this, but really it's fundamentally a collaboration and a communication breakdown. So there are so many more things to detect than there are humans to triage it. So fine tuning is so important. What we do in detection engineering before we even put it into our alerting system is we will run it silently. We will hunt it backwards. We will retro hunt a new rule for at least 2 months, understand what the false positive rates are, get that down to absolutely as narrow as you can before you push it out. So when we're talking about detections and alerts, we're talking about 3 things. What's the true positiveness of it? What's the false positiveness of it? And what's the robustness of it? You can write a super, super, super narrow IOC driven hash looking for mimikatz that'll only hit on one combination of mimikatz compilation, right? That's going to fail your robustness test, but it'll have great false positive and great true positive. Conversely, false positiveness, you could write something that'll catch every single mimikatz in the entire world, but it'll be too broad. It'll have way too many false positives, so that'll fail the false positive test. So really, it's a delicate tuning balance from the detection engineering side of tuning those 3 knobs. How can I make this the most robust detection I can so it'll hit on the wide amount of cases, but still make sure it's low in false positivity, but also you've tested it and validated, making sure it really will fire when you need it the most. So I think that's one thing from a detection engineering standpoint, but once it's pushed into production live, there's a maintenance cycle, right? And enterprises don't stand still. There's new noise that gets introduced. And a lot of times that needs to be elevated from the SOC back to the detection engineers to say, hey, we're having a problem with this. We're only able to triage, X hundred, hits per human being, and we only have 10 human beings. Something's got to change. So we need the detection engineers to jump in that life cycle and tune existing false positive reductions. The goal is 0, right? Like inbox 0. That's really what we want in our SIEMs. It's a goal that we should strive for. My inbox is definitely not 0 right now, but that's what we need to strive for. If you have an alert that is going to produce so many more hits than a human can ever, triage, what's the point of that detection? It's kind of useless. So looking for automation, that's really where your SIEM, your SOAR comes into play. It's also behavioral detections. And as we're going to talk about AI, there's a lot of promise for AI to do recommendations up to the human to say, hey, this is hit 10,000 times, but all 9,999 were from the domain controller. Recommend tuning this detection. So it's a life cycle, and it goes back and forth between different teams to communicate.
Yeah, I want to touch on a couple of things that you mentioned there. So first off, the concept of the discipline of detection engineering, I think, is relatively recent. I think in my experience, I'm probably dating myself a little bit, but typically we would have, the tier 3, very seasoned, very experienced analyst writing detections, and then also triaging alerts. But I've seen recently, and I'm sure you guys have as well, that detection engineering is a discipline unto itself, where people are tasked specifically with that process of identifying new detection requirements, perhaps from threat intelligence inputs, identifying a detection strategy based upon the data that is going to be available to that team within a data lake or a SIEM, and actually developing the content and testing it, to your point. Right. But I think that the structure and rigor that you described is probably less common than it really needs to be. And that might be one of the fundamental factors that creates this situation where 50+% of alerts in a SOC are false positive. So I would agree, if more people went down the direction of applying more of an SDLC mindset to detection development and treating detection truly as code, this would probably be a little bit better.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that, I think one of the rises that we've seen is closed sourced black box detection vendors out there. So if you have a closed box vendor that says that they can detect XYZ, that's a lot of times not sufficient enough for your CISO or your leadership team, especially when you're being targeted by a specific ransomware gang or actor. So having black box technologies, yes, I think vendor X has it. Is really challenging. So that's why I think we have seen a rise in augmenting your alerting capability with your own team or other staff that can help with that. But yeah, absolutely agree.
Yep. So you're describing kind of a purple team exercise, which maybe happens on a semi-regular basis in some very mature organizations. Others never do that at all. Yeah. We're actually going to come back around to that sort of concept in a few minutes here, but I want to make sure, Ryan, we also give you the floor here. What are your thoughts with respect to trying to optimize security outcomes in security operations centers?
Yeah, I mean, to piggyback off of what Fred was talking about, I think a big theme here is more of a proactive approach as well. And that goes into the purple team exercises that you just mentioned. And you can have all the detections you want, you can have all the logs sources you want coming into your SIEM, but if you don't actually have an ability to validate that that's all working and validate that detection rules will actually fire based off of certain threat activity, then you don't have full certainty that you're able to gain visibility to a cyber attack if it actually happens. So how do you leverage technologies like security validation products, which exist out in the market? We have a solution in our portfolio for this, but a lot of customers use that on a daily basis and a continuous basis to ensure the health and effectiveness of their SIEM and security operations capabilities. But they also use a lot in SIEM migrations to ensure that they have the same or better coverage and overall capabilities and response capabilities when they perform that migration. So I think that's a critical component, and how you do it there's a bunch of different ways to take a proactive approach in terms of testing and validating of that. But there are certainly a lot of products and services out there that can help organizations do that. And depending on the maturity and the structure of an organization within any particular company, some might be able to take that on themselves. Some may require more of a services-based approach. But there are ways to go about that and to be more proactive and thoughtful and frankly, better prepared if a cyber attack happens. And that's regardless of what technologies you have deployed.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And it's one thing I used to stress when I ran incident response tabletop exercises is obviously preparedness is absolutely paramount because unless you've really built the muscle memory of dealing with an incident, you're going to wind up flat-footed when it actually happens. And I think the validation aspect that you described is a good way to start. But I think also within the context of SIEM migrations, a validation exercise can also be the punctuation mark on the end of the SIEM migration sentence, right? How do we know we've accomplished the goal? We can actually perform the cutover from old SIEM to new SIEM, from legacy to the cloud or whatever it winds up being. And I think validation is a good way to do that because it provides effectively the proof, right? You're able to show the receipts that yes, we've ran the Conti ransomware scenario, or name your actor, or however you want to organize one of those scenarios, and you can produce that for leadership to say yes, we've successfully accomplished the cutover or the migration. We're ready to migrate. And that's also one of the areas that I see people get caught out with respect to SIEM migrations. Is that overlapping period of time where effectively the organization has to run both tools because they're not yet confident enough that the new platform is actually going to do the job. And nestled within that, you've got duplication of engineering efforts, you've got duplication of spend for licensing. So there's a lot of reasons why someone might want to try to accelerate the process of migration. But I think maybe buried within that, there's potentially some risks that could equate to maybe inequality of coverage. But I'm curious if you guys have any thoughts on maybe recommendations you might give to here's a few ideas on how you could do this more quickly while also reducing risk. And I'll throw that to you first, Ryan.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the key points I think we've covered, but making sure that you engage with the right vendor and the right partner to help you through that journey. People or partners who have experience and who have performed similar migrations for other companies of your size and your industries that have similar log sources, have similar requirements. That's a critical component, not trying to do this alone, making sure that you have well-defined requirements and outcomes that you're looking to drive to. Again, not trying to do a one-for-one swap, just thinking about it as a data lake and, hey, we're going to take all these data sources and just shove them over here and now we're done. It needs to be a much more thoughtful exercise than that. You need to really think about SOC transformation and how do we transform the way that we're delivering security to the organization and our ability to respond to cybersecurity threats and attacks. So those are some critical things that I think can help ensure that the process goes smooth. Now, that may not necessarily help make it go faster. I think if you engage the right people and be thoughtful about it, it can certainly help keep the project more closely aligned with the timelines that are defined. No matter what, as I said before, it's certainly a massive project and undertaking, but there are ways to help accelerate and ensure that this is done smoothly. And I think those are a couple of the critical pieces. There's certainly a lot that can be done from a detection engineering and automation standpoint that I think Fred can speak to as well. That can fit into that.
Would love to get some thoughts on that because if I'm thinking about sort of again the whole process of SIEM migration, you've got partially log aggregation, log architecture, but then also the detection engineering element on top of it. Fred, I'm sure you've got some thoughts on accelerating that last aspect of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think when you're switching, right, you're doing this big move, this big migration, and it's critical to get right. I think there's a good, as Ryan kind of mentioned, there's a good process you have to follow, right? And any SIEM vendor can help you migrate to that to their product. I think step one is thinking about it differently. It's not O1. I think we've kept harping on this. This is one of the biggest things is. I think at the leadership level, the reason you're doing this is for a transformation, right? A transformation in cost and business and process, or a transformation in ability from a technical side to detect on more data, to alert, to reduce false positives, to automate. So I think there's this big picture you got to keep in mind. So as it relates to how do you speed that up? Having a good plan and a good blueprint, right? Measuring, using validation tools to measure your before state and your after state, and not so worried about the one-to-one translations. Think differently about it, but I like to think of it as a MITRE ATT&CK coverage. So that's one way to think about this is, our MITRE ATT&CK coverage previously was this, and post it is this. I think there's also definitely thinking about what's critical to detect and prioritizing them. I would caution, what I like to recommend is to do the easy things first, right? Start easy, get some easy wins, right? So something like, IOC detection at the SIEM level and automating that. So get that win under your belt. But while you have the professional services of the team that's helping you migrate, also sprinkle in, after you get some short-term wins, sprinkle in some of those harder detection engineering. Use that as a lesson. Leverage your team that you're migrating to help you understand what you need to do. How do you write these detections? Not one for one, but how do I cover, email? How do I cover, web proxy DNS and network? How do I do EDR? How do I migrate, win event logs? Like all of these critical logs. Making sure the data, efficiency or effectiveness is there is really important. So get some small wins under your belt, have some successes, but then tackle a few, token prioritized harder challenges while you have that onboarding team to side saddle with you is really important.
Makes sense. So yeah, I think the theme within probably both of those comments is really security as a team sport, and try to leverage, the help that you can get from others that might be out there. Obviously, there's some open source projects that you could use to help with something like that. And one thing I will say, I know that SnapAttack has an open source community edition, which anybody can log into and get a little bit of a head start in terms of that detection content development. All of those, or at least the grand majority of them, can be made available in Chronicle as well. Chronicle, I believe, also has a set of curated detection rules that could be made available to users right on day one as
Absolutely.
well. Right? Yeah.
Yep. So yeah, day one, you have an inherent detection capability for threats that we see on the front lines that are representative of what we see in incident response engagements and our managed detection response service. So you're getting very strong coverage right out of the gate, but certainly validating that against threats that are relevant to you, augmenting that with additional detections through SnapAttack or user-created detections, however you want to approach it. But certainly we're giving you a head start and layering on Mandiant expertise into that. And that will be a theme throughout too, and some of the other areas of this conversation.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, actually one of the key things in retooling, retraining your staff to this new language can be detection as code, right? So detection as code, we've talked a lot about one-to-ones. It's one of the few opportunities that you can actually see what a query in your existing SIEM would look like, click a button, and then see what the YARA-L, language detection for that is. So that can actually really accelerate teams' ability to, especially in the early days when their teams, their SOC, their IR, and their detection engineers aren't up to date on the language. As they're getting retrained, retooled, it's really easy. You can use an IDE to build out this process name, child process, command line contains, click a button, and then pops, your SIEM detection as code, your SIEM vendor's language from an IDE concept. And even Chronicle has AI now built in where you can click a button and describe what you want to do. So you could say, I want to detect on this email, this child process, or this command line argument is this. You might not know how to write the code. AI can help start building. I think that's, we'll talk about AI in the future of SIEM migrations, but that's really helping customers seeing it in one language and then learning what it looks like in the next language until you get that muscle memory of how to develop YARA-L, yourself.
Yeah, and you touched on that earlier, Fred, but I think it bears repeating. There's a significant technological or at least knowledge gap between what an individual and organization may know about their old platform and the skill that they may not yet have on the new. And buried within that is a significant amount of existential risk to that organization, where they're operating in a period of time where effectively they've taken themselves back a few notches with respect to expertise and tooling. That's an opportunity for a bad guy, and anything that can be done to help alleviate that concern, I think, is a great win. And as I mentioned, so SnapAttack, obviously, we've got some ability to help there, and some specific things that relate to how that would work in Chronicle. But all right, so I'm curious, you've both kind of touched on a few things as it relates to things that you're seeing as kind of current trends, but I wonder if you can go maybe a little bit further with respect to either of those. And Fred, you talked about detection engineering and AI. Ryan, I think you had similar concepts or similar notions around automation and AI. AI seems top of mind for everybody right now. I know there's a lot of different ways that this can be implemented or applied to a specific problem. What are you guys seeing right now as it relates to things like application of AI to security operations? Why don't we start with you, Ryan?
Sure. Yeah, and before getting to that, I think just in overall top trends, one of the points I wanted to make is we've used the term SIEM a lot, and that's still very applicable. But what you're seeing now as well, a trend in the market is for a lot of these more modern platforms like Chronicle is a rebranding and an emphasis around security operations platform. And the critical reason for that, outside of just a change in name, is that SIEM is just one component to the overall platform and what is enabling the SOC. And so what you're seeing with a lot of these modern platforms is native inherent capability that is extended from traditionally point products or point solutions. So integration and native application of threat intelligence, native inherent SOAR capability, adding in context about risk and visibility sourced from attack surface management solutions or vulnerability scanning and other solutions. And that's only going to continue. Validation as well. How do we automate and integrate validation into that overall SOC ecosystem? So that's one of the trends that's happening right now, and even getting into the future is really that advancement of how do we bring all this capability together as native integrated solutions. And part of that is generative AI. So Google Cloud is certainly on the forefront of that. One of the advantages that we have in this market is the fact that we control all aspects of the platform, the underlying infrastructure of our SOC operations platform in Chronicle, as well as the AI capability. So none of it's third-party solutions that are being plugged in. It's a native inherent to the solution. And AI is really helping with a lot of automation and workflow enhancements. So Fred, you already mentioned it around being able to more quickly search using natural language capability. That's certainly a trend that we're seeing. So you don't necessarily need to know complex query languages or rule languages. You can use natural language to do some of that, helping with summarization of threat intelligence data or summarization of even things that you're investigating. So there's a lot of opportunity not to replace what anyone in the SOC is doing, but to help make their job a lot easier and to really improve that workflow and improve the outcomes that we're driving towards. So those are a lot of the trends that we're seeing. I think SOAR and automation is a big part of that. If you don't have that natively plugged in and integrated, and you're not thinking about how to automate a lot of the stuff you're doing and thinking about it in terms of a single platform that can easily integrate detection, investigation, and response capabilities all together, then you're not thinking about it correctly. So that's really where we're steering customers and the way we're talking to customers about how we can help them transform what they're doing.
I think that makes a lot of sense as it relates to the vertical integration that you described around functional consolidation of tooling into one sort of ecosystem approach, or at least a suite of tools that are optimized to work together, ultimately driving, I think, a better outcome. And you touched on automation, and I wanted to take a second to talk about that as well, because I think a lot of times the motivation to automate something may simply be just to speed it up, which is not necessarily a bad thing to try to drive. But I think the other benefit that you get from automation that's not commonly talked about is the repeatability and predictability of results. so that should that automation playbook trigger, the same thing's going to happen every time, which gives a lot more confidence in the organization's ability to actually respond to a true positive alert should it happen, because it's programmatically defined. Here's X, Y, and Z steps that are going to happen. Ultimately, again, leading to, I think, a more sort of well-oiled machine in the security operations center. And I certainly think AI is going to help a lot with some aspects of that, including things like playbook definition.
Yep.
But Fred, curious if you've got any additional thoughts on anything in the realm of current trends, be they AI or detection engineering.
Yeah, just to tag on, automation. Really, automation is, if there's one thing that's harder than SIEM migration, it's hiring, a staff full of ninjas, right? They just don't exist, and exceedingly capacity. We're just not meeting demand on trained, human beings. So one of the best things you can do is codify processes, right? Codify that in automation processes through your SOAR. So actually, I was just having a conversation around this with another Google employee actually at lunch, and we were talking about how do we get out of, how do we codify like what the first 3 or 5 chess moves are of any given match, right? So let's say detection X fires. What are the top 3-5 chess moves that a human has to do, and can we automate that? If we can automate that away, can we make decisions along the way? Okay, go grab the binary, run it against Yara to decide yes or no, this is malicious, right? Bang it up against data sets, virus total, etc. How can you automatically trim those false positives? So anyway, I think automation is absolutely critical. Separate from that, AI has a lot of promise, right? So not to mix the two. Automation is, you know what to do and you need to do it at scale. AI is, increasingly with LLMs, large language models, showing very, very promise. We've often, I've been very bullish on the AI train for, since 2015, we really started looking at false positive reduction, leveraging AI. And one thing that became very clear is you need to know what the needle looks like very well to train an AI model to find that needle. And so, at SnapAttack, one of the things we're doing is we're actually not just a detection engineering shop, but we're actually capturing all of these threats so that we have the true positive, this is what a needle looks like. What we're now doing is we're trying to train models to not only say this is what it looks like, but also how different is it from what you're seeing in the field. So if we know, 150 variations of Mimikatz, and then there's one log at 2 a.m., we can compare that to known goods, or known bads, right? Known true positives, and say, how closely does this cluster? So I think there's going to be a tipping point when we start training more and more data on known true positives. I think AI can take over and start understanding nuanced behaviors that only right now, very, very skilled tier 3 SOC analysts can triage. I think that also requires cloud native, right? You have to enrich that data. For one log alone, you can't make a true positive, false positive decision 70% of the time. You need to enrich that data with locality, previous historic behaviors. You possibly have to go retrieve forensic evidence from that box in an automated fashion. But that combined, that workflow combined can really help with, enhancing automation, enhancing AI to make better decisions quicker, faster. Because, we're not making that many more cyber, we've been calling the cry for more cyber professionals since the 90s, right? Early 2000s, and it's just not happening. So I think there is really a lot of potential. I think we're at this tipping point now.
Yeah. I mean, certainly with AI, you hit on it. I mean, one of the big things is you don't necessarily need top-end experts, both in security as well as on that particular solution. It certainly can help augment a lot of that work and make it easier for somebody to learn or be a practitioner or analyst inside of a SOC, which is really important. I think another key point, sorry, I wanted to make sure, I didn't want to take this for granted that, the audience would kind of know this or wanted to make sure we emphasized it, but you're not going to get all of the capabilities and all of the integrations that we're talking about and support for AI with on-prem solutions, right? It needs to be cloud native. That's the only way to make this work. That's the only way to make this scale. So if you're looking to make all of these on-premise solutions work through, kind of legacy integration or trying to find a way to make them talk to each other in some way, it's just not going to work, nor is it going to be financially viable to even build infrastructure to support such a solution, even if it existed. So it is important just to emphasize that, what we're talking about here in terms of where the industry is really going, not just what we're doing in Google Cloud Security, but really as a whole in the industry, is looking forward to cloud native solutions and infrastructure that can theoretically scale, indefinitely, and can have these capabilities and have AI layered on top of it or built within it, just natively to that platform. It's really critical.
Yeah, I agree. And to me, those just represent enormous opportunities for the organization that has the fortune really to leapfrog from the capabilities that might have been present or available to them with their legacy platforms to the art of the possible of what could be, available to them. And as a CISO is thinking about that sort of decision, and again, the challenges that are baked into it, but the benefit that comes from it, there is so much more possible through some of the new tooling that's available from an automation or AI standpoint, that there's likely to be some cost offset as it relates to their overall total cost of ownership of the security operations team in general, that may skew the financial decision one way or another for them, making it easier for them to make that business case. But so we've kind of been dancing around this a little bit, but I really think that no sort of end of year webinar is really kind of finished without a little bit of casting our eyes to the future. So I'm curious, let's get thoughts from both of you guys as it relates to, where do you think this is heading? I think AI is probably, first or top of mind for everybody. Maybe there's something else that you guys have in mind as it relates to what's coming next, but if you could cast your eyes to the future, what do you think is coming next? And Fred, why don't we start with you on that?
Yeah, a lot of it comes down to things that we've already said, but some of the interesting things are around the data, right? It really comes down to data. Data normalization. It's been a promise forever. There's 17 standards out there, right? I think the industry has some opportunities to standard. Is it OSCF standard? Every vendor has their own standard, but I think where we need to get to is that we all agree on a standard. So I think that's. I wouldn't call that a prediction because I'm not putting my money that we're going to standardize on this at all. So it's not a prediction, but it's a hope. It's a Christmas wish list. So that's one. I think data standards, data normalization would solve a lot in our industry if we could all reference, the same object with the same name. I think that would enable a vast amount of sharing. We have this Tower of Babylon problem right now, where everybody is speaking a different language, and we're all just trying to hunt APT 29, right?
Sure.
But we're all calling everything so differently. So I think MITRE is a step in that right direction. That's the one promise that I've seen that's came to fruition. I think everybody has adopted that as an open standard for how we talk about threats. We need to do the same about our data. The other thing I think is a trend. I think it's obvious, cloud, right? So that's I actually don't even want to belabor the point. I feel like all of our listeners understand the need to move to cloud enabled operations. The other one that I think is super important is also threat sharing at machine speed. And what I mean by that is we're not right now, we are stuck in the early 2000s, where when we share information about a threat, it's IOC based, right? We have sticks taxi format. A lot of ISACs out there, they still use email to distribute like threat information. And you're really looking in the rearview mirror when you talk about like IOCs, IPs, hashes, domains. That is something that was malicious to some other threat actor in somebody else's network. It is not necessarily indicative that they're going to use those same IP hashes when they attack you. We need to get to threat sharing, like at the behavioral detection level about certain malware, threat actors, MITRE attack techniques, but it has to be at machine speed. So we need to be able to share threats from vendor to vendor agnostically. And I think code is the right example of that. You can write C code, compile it to an Android phone, to an iOS iPhone, to a laptop, to a server. We need to get there with threats. That's going to be an uphill battle, but we need to share information, not just from human to human, but machine. That'll enable, very, very transformational detections, right? And tip finally, hopefully, the advantage towards the defenders as opposed to the adversaries.
So a further shift towards tactics, techniques, and procedures as like fundamental to a detection strategy. I would agree with that, and I think there's a lot of benefits to it, especially that kind of common lexicon that you described. Although I have to say, the cynic in me, the thing that brought to mind was the XKCD article.
Yes.
Now we have 15 standards, which I'm sure others out there thought similar. However, I completely agree with you. How about you, Ryan? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of things to look out for, some of which is already happening now and some of which we've already covered. But from a platform perspective, again, highlighting the fact that we're seeing this evolution of moving just from independent SIEM platforms or data lakes, on-prem infrastructure to cloud native with natively inherent capability that is bringing in a lot of traditionally third-party or just point solutions, and empowering the SOC to have much more visibility and context about the threats that they're investigating. That's really a critical component. We're going to see that continued evolution of more and more of that capability being brought in and ingested into these platforms, and certainly something that we're focused on among others in this space. Also, the ease of use aspect in really helping with improving the ability to find threats or hunt for threats that may be in the environment. So when you think about our ability to apply the simplicity in the performance of Google search applied onto security, that's a really powerful, concept. And that's something that we're really continuing to emphasize and work towards and innovate around. So how can we apply that concept and that capability to security operations as a whole, and applying Gen AI and natural language searching on top of that so that you can find things that may be going on in the environment with relative ease compared to the steps that you would have to take today with legacy solutions. So we're going to continue to see the evolution of that, the evolution of the impact of generative AI embedded into these platforms like Chronicle, and really helping to improve some of those workflows. So those are some of the key things. I think also when you look at organizations that rely on managed service providers and rely on third parties to help with threat hunting because they don't have the inherent expertise. Certainly you talk about what SnapAttack offers there in terms of ways to automate that, but also when you have a cloud native platform that scales, at whatever scale you need, that really enables better collaboration with third parties to be able to work with you and to be able to provide those services to you, compared to leveraging more difficult to use or access on-prem solutions. So I think those are some critical areas where we're seeing a lot of innovation. Certainly automation's been a theme, and we can talk about that more as well.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. And I think so much investment in not just AI, but automation in general, as it relates to augmenting skill sets. Because I think both of you guys have kind of touched on this a few times, but Fred, you mentioned that there's just not enough people to go around. Ryan, you mentioned that skills have to be augmented. And I think both of those things are really emblematic of the same core problem, is that, ultimately, the bad guys aren't slowing down. We obviously have to keep up as well, but it's super difficult to do that from a pure let's throw bodies at the problem kind of standpoint. And so if I think about maybe where I see security operations going, it's along the same lines as it relates to the human aspect of this, but more around the organizational structure and the collaboration that might exist between different core functions within security operations. Whereas I think historically there might have been a little bit more siloing between certain functional groups, like perhaps CTI, and then the SOC itself. Maybe CTI is focused on doing things like finished report development or strategic intelligence reporting for stakeholder decision making. I see more of a consolidation of that capability with detection engineering directly, because ultimately, especially within the concept of detection as code, threat intelligence really should be creating the detection requirements for the security operations team. And so I think the tighter collaboration between those two units themselves ultimately creates a better downstream outcome. And I could see more organization in that way. I think some barriers there could be some technical skill, because I think that's one area that I've seen threat intelligence teams maybe fall a little bit short is their ability to hand off the right types of information or with the specificity and precision that the detection engineering team needs in order to do their job. And I could see that improving with the help of things like, augmented outcomes from AI or automation, et cetera, things like that. But we are just about up on time here, guys. So I'm wondering if I'd love to get closing remarks from both of you. Ryan, why don't we start with you? Anything that you want to leave our audience with today?
Yeah, sure. I mean, just to reiterate and emphasize some of the key points of today's theme, as you're thinking about your security operations capabilities today and the technologies that are helping to enable that, if you're not leveraging a cloud native platform, if you're not thinking about native applied threat intel into that program, you're not thinking about integrated detection, investigation, response, and you're leveraging multiple solutions today, disparate products or views and workflows to accomplish the tasks that you need to accomplish. Or if you're running into those infrastructure challenges we talked about earlier that are impacting cost and performance, and I've seen this quite a bit firsthand. Even legacy licensing models that are limiting you on terms of your scalability. Whatever the challenges are that you may have, definitely encourage you to look at solutions in the market like Google Cloud Chronicle and what we're doing in our innovative approach to security operations, and thinking about that more thoughtfully around how you can really transform the capabilities that you're delivering around security. And ultimately helping to improve your ability within a SOC to protect your organization. I mean, that's really the critical outcome that any organization is driving towards, and any SOC within an organization is driving towards, is how do we put ourselves in the best possible position to secure the organization and make sure that if anything does happen, that we have insights and visibility into that as quickly as possible to respond. And that's really difficult to do these days with older platforms that have the limitations we've talked about.
Yeah, I think just in wrapping up, I think one of the main critical things is to understand why you're making this choice, right? So you are ultimately making this migration SIEM choice for strategic reasons, for business reasons, and for technological opening up new horizon reasons. So I think understanding what those reasons are, communicating that to your SIEM vendor migration destination, so that they can help you work out a plan. I think it's also important to communicate that with your staff, because I've seen many migrations go awry when proper reasons for the migration weren't properly communicated up front. So I think getting your technical folks in the trainings early on, start learning the new language. I think understanding the big vision of where you're going and communicating that this is going to be a painful process, right? There are going to be pains, there's bumps, but I think having that clear vision of why you're doing it can help you through those low times. And I think leveraging your vendor, like really, really lean on them. They've seen this before. They've seen migrations. They are the subject matter experts in this case. This, to your point, might be the first time that you're going through it, but it's probably the 150th time they've gone through it. So ask questions of them, leverage them as a consulting organization to you, to help you through that migration. So yeah, communicate vision, understand it's going to be challenging, and make sure everybody's on the same boat, understand why you're going through this migration. Yeah.
Daunting task, but hopefully made a little bit easier with the comments from Ryan Rubian of Google Cloud and Fred Fry from SnapAttack. Again, I'm Paul from SnapAttack. I guess closing thoughts from me, if you'd like to learn more about how SnapAttack and Google Cloud can help accelerate this process from you and also put you in a good place for future security operations outcomes, feel free to get in touch with either of us or any of us online, or check us out at www.snapattack.com, where you'll find a case study that specifically speaks to how we help a very large data center provider accelerate their process of migrating from a legacy on-prem SIEM platform to Google Chronicle. With that, happy holidays. Hope you guys have a wonderful next couple of weeks and a great 2024, and we'll see you in the new year. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
So.